In medieval times, staying warm wasn't easy. With no central heating or insulation, peasants had to use clever tricks to survive the cold. Let's explore how they heated their homes without the comforts we have today. At the heart of every medieval home was the hearth. It wasn't just a place to cook, it provided warmth in the winter and light in the evenings. Without it, surviving the cold would have been nearly impossible. But while the hearth was essential, it came with its own set of challenges. By today's standards, medieval hearths were extremely basic. Most were just a fire built on a dirt floor surrounded by stones or bricks, and unlike modern fireplaces, they had no chimney. For centuries, peasants lived with smoke-filled homes and no proper ventilation. Instead of going up a chimney, smoke filled the room, hovering from chest height to the ceiling. In winter, with doors and windows shut tight, it got especially thick. Peasants often crouched or sat low to stay under the worst of it. If they had dating profiles, enjoys long walks through smoky rooms would be a common line. The youngest and oldest usually slept closest to the fire for warmth. But this came at a cost. They were hit hardest by breathing issues. Records show many elderly people and children had chronic respiratory problems from lifelong smoke exposure. One fascinating fact, the fire was rarely allowed to go out. Embers were buried under ash at night to keep them glowing until morning. Starting a fire from scratch was tough and often meant borrowing flame from a neighbor. During the coldest months, families lived around the hearth. They cooked, ate, worked, and slept there. Move away from it and you'd freeze. Medieval homes had no insulation, and stone or daub walls offered little protection. Fire safety was a constant fear, especially in homes with thatched roofs. A stray spark could set the place ablaze, and entire villages could burn. Still, they had no choice but to keep the fires going. It was a choice between freezing and burning. Smoke exposure had serious health effects. Studies of medieval skeletons show widespread lung damage and signs of diseases like COPD or emphysema. The soot coated everything, including people's lungs. Despite the danger, the hearth was the center of family life. It gave warmth through brutal winters and brought people together. Around the fire, stories were shared, skills passed on, and bonds strengthened. As essential as the hearth was, it created a serious problem that required creative solutions. While the hearth provided essential warmth, medieval peasants faced a serious problem: what to do with all that smoke. Unlike our modern homes with proper chimneys, peasant dwellings relied on much simpler ventilation systems. The most common solution was the smoke hole, a small opening in the roof directly above the hearth area. These smoke holes were far from perfect. Typically just a foot or two in diameter, they allowed some smoke to escape, but never all of it. The hole was usually positioned at the highest point of the roof, taking advantage of the natural tendency of hot air to rise. On calm days with good weather, this system worked reasonably well. Medieval real estate agents would have advertised these homes as having natural air circulation and authentic, rustic atmosphere. The real problems began during bad weather. Rain or snow coming through the smoke hole would fall directly onto the hearth, potentially extinguishing the precious fire. To prevent this disaster, peasants would cover the hole with a piece of animal hide or wooden board during storms. This kept the precipitation out but trapped all the smoke inside, creating choking conditions that were nearly unbearable. Over time, the interior of a peasant home told the story of years of smoke exposure. Ceilings and upper walls became coated with a thick, black layer of soot. This wasn't just unsightly, it was also surprisingly useful. The soot particles mixed with resins from the burning wood created a natural wood preservative that protected roof beams from insects and rot. These were possibly the first self-preserving houses, though the preservation method might take your breath away, literally. The walls didn't just collect soot, they also became sticky with creosote and cooking residue. This mixture of smoke compounds and food grease created a dark, tacky coating that was nearly impossible to clean off. In many homes, this layer built up year after year, sometimes reaching a thickness of several millimeters. Living in these conditions took a serious toll on health. Eye irritation was constant, leading to chronic redness, tearing, and even temporary blindness during particularly smoky periods. Breathing problems plagued everyone, but especially the very young and the elderly. Headaches were so common that they were simply considered a normal part of daily life rather than a medical problem. A few months ago, I had no idea what a health ring even was until my fiance got me one, and I have to say, I'm shocked this isn't a widely known and used product. It tracks my stress levels, and what I found out is that some supplements made my stress score spike, while others actually helped bring it down. I adjusted a few things based on that, and honestly, I feel 10 years younger. My wife mainly uses it to track her menstrual cycles, and she is obsessed with her sleep quality score. I noticed they are currently running a limited 69% discount, but I don't know how long it will last. It's currently only $60, and it's clear. This one is the best bang for your buck, with other health rings priced around $350 with less functions. They managed to price it this low because they cut out the middleman like Amazon, Walmart, etc., who drive up the price and take a big margin, ending up with the customer paying 3 to 5 times more. If you are on TV, you can check it out yourself by pausing the video and scanning the QR code with your phone camera or clicking the first link in the description of this video. Archaeological evidence from medieval burial sites reveals just how damaging this environment was. Skull remains often show sinus infections that had become so severe they affected the bone. Lung problems were widespread, with many skeletons showing evidence of chronic respiratory infections and inflammation. The most frustrating part for peasants was that they lacked both the knowledge and tools to create better ventilation. The principles of airflow and proper chimney construction wouldn't become widely understood until centuries later. And even if they did understand the problem, most lacked the resources to implement better solutions. Instead, peasants developed practical workarounds. Many learned to cook quickly when weather conditions were favorable for good smoke evacuation. Some would build their fires smaller in bad weather, sacrificing warmth for breathability. Others developed the habit of opening doors or windows briefly during cooking to create a cross draft that would clear some of the worst smoke. Winter brought a painful choice: keep the smoke hole open and lose valuable heat, or close it and choke on smoke. Most chose the latter, believing that cold could kill faster than smoke. As a result, winter months saw a sharp increase in respiratory illnesses throughout medieval villages. With smoke holes providing only minimal relief, peasants needed additional heat sources to survive the bitter cold. When temperatures plummeted during medieval winters, peasants turned to an unusual but effective heating solution: their livestock. Bringing animals inside the home wasn't just a random act of kindness. It was a calculated survival strategy that made perfect sense in a world without central heating. The practice was remarkably common across Europe. As evening fell and the bitter cold set in, peasants would bring smaller livestock, pigs, goats, sheep, and chickens, directly into the main living area. These animals weren't treated as pets. They were living, breathing heat generators that could make the difference between survival and freezing. The science behind this practice was sound, even if medieval peasants didn't understand the exact physics. A single adult pig produces approximately 1,000 BTUs of body heat per hour, roughly equivalent to a small space heater. A family with 2 pigs, a few chickens, and maybe a goat could raise the ambient temperature of their small home by several critical degrees. Medieval home decorators had a unique approach. This pig really ties the room together. Larger animals like cows and horses were too big for the main room, but still provided valuable heat. Many homes were built with attached stalls or byres where these animals could be kept. The shared wall between human and animal spaces allowed heat to transfer into the living area. Some clever designs even positioned animal pens slightly below the human living space, allowing the warm air from the animals to rise naturally into the family's quarters. 800s, rural homes in many parts of Europe still incorporated space for animals inside or directly attached to human living quarters. The tradition only began to fade with industrialization and improved heating technologies. Of course, this heating solution came with obvious drawbacks. The presence of animals meant constant noise and unavoidable smells. Livestock brought fleas, ticks, and other parasites that easily transferred to human hosts. When your neighbors asked what you did last night, "I spooned with the goat," was a perfectly reasonable answer. Despite these challenges, the benefits outweighed the drawbacks when survival was at stake. Archaeological evidence shows that homes commonly had designated areas for animals, often with small depressions in the floor to contain bedding and waste. Some even had drainage channels to help manage the mess. The practice varied by region and climate. In Mediterranean areas with milder winters, animals might only come inside during the worst weather. In Scandinavia and other northern regions, shared human-animal housing was more elaborate and permanent, with specific architectural features designed to maximize heat transfer. For children growing up in medieval homes, this arrangement was simply normal. Historical accounts rarely mention the practice as unusual. It was just how things were done. The reliance on animal heat revealed something important about medieval survival. Peasants focused on practical solutions using resources they already had. When animals alone couldn't provide enough warmth, medieval people turned to their next line of defense against the cold. Medieval peasants took a fundamentally different approach to winter comfort than we do today. While modern people focus on heating entire buildings, medieval folk concentrated on a much more energy-efficient strategy, keeping their bodies warm through strategic layering of clothing. This wear it, don't heat it philosophy was born of necessity in a time when fuel was limited and homes were drafty at best. The cornerstone of medieval winter wear was wool, nature's original performance fabric. Wool has properties that synthetic materials still struggle to match. It insulates even when wet, wicks moisture away from the body, and contains natural lanolin that makes it somewhat water-resistant. For peasants who couldn't afford the finest cloth, coarser wool served as their primary defense against freezing temperatures. Linen formed the base layer for most peasants, worn directly against the skin. Though linen doesn't insulate as well as wool, it absorbs sweat and keeps the skin drier, which is crucial for avoiding the bone-deep chill that comes from perspiration cooling on the body. Over this, multiple layers of wool garments would be added as temperatures dropped. The typical winter outfit included woolen leggings or hose for men, long woolen dresses for women, and heavy tunics for both. These weren't changed daily as our clothes are now. The same garments might be worn for weeks or even the entire winter season without washing. Their approach to laundry day was basically spring cleaning in the most literal sense. Headwear was considered essential. Medieval people understood something that modern parents still tell their children. Tremendous heat loss occurs through an uncovered head. Simple wool caps or coifs covered the head and often wrapped around the neck as well, serving the function of both hat and scarf. For those who could afford them, fur-lined caps provided superior insulation. Feet presented a particular challenge. Leather shoes of the period offered little insulation, so peasants developed creative solutions. Many wrapped their feet in strips of wool cloth before putting on shoes. Others stuffed their footwear with straw, which created a surprisingly effective air pocket insulation system. Medieval Uggs were just regular shoes stuffed with whatever wasn't currently being eaten by the livestock. Unlike today, where indoor and outdoor clothing differ significantly, medieval peasants generally wore the same garments regardless of whether they were inside or outside. The concept of indoor clothes was largely non-existent. When you came in from the fields, you might dry your outer layer by the fire, but you didn't change into a separate outfit. Perhaps most strikingly to modern sensibilities, medieval peasants typically slept in the same clothes they wore during the day. Specialized sleeping garments were a luxury few could afford. Instead, they simply kept their day clothes on and added additional layers of blankets or cloaks over themselves. This practice eliminated the dangerous moment of undressing in a freezing room and ensured they were always ready to deal with nighttime emergencies. The limited availability of firewood made this clothing-centric approach to warmth a necessity. In many regions, forests were the property of local lords, and peasants had restricted rights to gather wood. Specific amounts were allocated to each household, and exceeding your allowance could result in harsh penalties. With such limitations, it made more sense to focus on personal insulation rather than heating large volumes of air. Archaeological evidence gives us insights into how effective these clothing strategies were. Preserved textiles from the period show dense weaves designed to trap air for insulation. Analysis of grave goods and rare preserved garments reveals multiple patching and mending, indicating that clothing was maintained and used for as long as possible. Despite their best efforts, staying warm through clothing alone had its limits, especially during the night when the hearth fire burned low. This limitation led medieval families to develop yet another heating strategy. When night fell in medieval times, staying warm became even more challenging. The hearth fire would burn low to prevent accidents, the temperature would drop, and the darkness would settle in like a cold blanket. This is when medieval families turned to one of the most effective and intimate heating methods available, sleeping together in tight groups to share precious body heat. The sleeping arrangements in a peasant home would shock modern sensibilities accustomed to private bedrooms. Entire families, parents, children, grandparents, and sometimes even extended relatives would sleep together on a single large bed platform or on shared straw mattresses near the hearth. Personal space was a concept that simply didn't exist when survival was at stake. This practice was rooted in simple thermodynamics. A human body generates about 250 to 300 British thermal units of heat per hour. By sleeping close together, families created collective warmth that could raise the temperature of their immediate surroundings by several critical degrees. Medieval marriage counselors had one solution for everything. Have you tried snuggling closer together near the pig pen? The typical sleeping setup consisted of straw-stuffed mattresses placed on the floor or on simple wooden platforms. These would be positioned as close to the hearth as safety allowed, near enough to benefit from the dying embers, but far enough to avoid stray sparks. During particularly cold nights, the entire family might sleep on the floor right next to the fire pit, sacrificing comfort for warmth. Privacy, as we understand it today, was virtually non-existent. Parents might conceive children with their older offspring sleeping just inches away. Everyday bodily functions occurred within earshot or even sight of other family members. This forced intimacy was simply accepted as the normal way of life, with cultural norms and behaviors developing around it. The youngest and oldest family members would typically be placed in the middle of the sleeping huddle, where they could benefit from body heat on all sides. Children would sleep between their parents, while elderly family members might sleep between younger adults who could better withstand the cooler outer positions. If you were an unpopular relative, you'd find yourself sleeping on the cold edge of the pile every night. To enhance the effectiveness of body heat, families developed various tricks. Heated stones or clay bricks would be wrapped in cloth and placed under the bedding before sleep. These makeshift bed warmers would radiate heat for hours, taking the worst edge off the cold before body heat could build up. Some households used simple hot water bottles made from animal bladders or pottery jugs wrapped in cloth. The bedding itself was designed to trap as much warmth as possible. Woolen blankets, if a family could afford them, provided excellent insulation. For poorer households, layers of old clothing, sacks, or even dried grasses piled on top served the purpose. In regions where animals provided wool or fur, these natural insulators might be sewn into covers or used as is on top of the sleeping area. Archaeological evidence supports these historical accounts. Medieval homes typically had a single sleeping area rather than multiple bedrooms. Even in larger peasant homes, separate sleeping chambers were rare. The concept of bedroom privacy began to emerge only among the wealthy, and even then, servants or children often shared sleeping space with their masters or parents. This communal sleeping arrangement had social implications beyond just providing warmth. It created strong family bonds and reinforced hierarchies within the household. Children observed adult behavior directly and learned social norms through continuous close contact. Family secrets were nearly impossible to keep, and the concept of a private life separate from family identity barely existed. While huddling together provided essential warmth during the night, medieval peasants still needed ways to stay warm during the day without constantly feeding the fire. This necessity led to the development of clever heating tricks that made the most of limited resources. Beyond the hearth, the animals, and the clothing, medieval peasants developed a remarkable array of ingenious heating methods that required little or no fuel. These creative approaches to warmth showcased the resourcefulness of people who had to survive frigid winters with minimal resources. Among the most effective heating innovations were clay stoves, which represented a significant improvement over simple, open hearths. These stoves, constructed from locally available clay mixed with straw or horsehair for strength, could retain heat for hours after the fire had died down. The design was deceptively simple but scientifically sound. A small firebox connected to a larger mass of clay that would absorb heat during burning and then slowly radiate it back into the room. These were the original set-it-and-forget-it appliances, though the infomercial would have been very short and entirely in Latin. A single firing of these stoves in the morning and evening could maintain reasonable temperatures throughout the day, while using significantly less wood than a constantly burning hearth. Archaeological evidence shows that these clay stoves became increasingly common in northern Europe from the 13th century onward, spreading from Russia and Scandinavia, where the need for efficient heating was most acute. Stone heat reservoirs served as another clever heating trick. Large rocks placed near the hearth during cooking would absorb substantial heat. Once thoroughly warmed, these stones could be moved to cold corners of the house, wrapped in cloth, or even placed under bedding to provide localized warmth. Some households kept special smooth stones specifically for this purpose, selecting types that held heat particularly well, such as soapstone or certain dense granites. These heated stones had multiple uses beyond just sitting nearby for warmth. They could be placed inside wooden boxes to create foot warmers, an early version of the hot water bottle. Some families used warmed stones inside small containers that could be carried from room to room, providing portable heat sources that required no flame. Medieval peasants were the original hot rock spa enthusiasts, minus the cucumber water and fancy robes. The construction of homes themselves incorporated passive heating principles, though the builders may not have understood the science behind their methods. Interior walls were often coated with mixtures of clay, straw, and dung, materials that provided surprisingly effective insulation. This primitive plaster helped to seal cracks, prevent drafts, and store thermal energy from the day's heating. Stuffing wall gaps with straw, hay, moss, or old textiles created additional insulation barriers. These materials trapped pockets of air, creating dead spaces that slowed heat transfer through walls and roofs. While not as effective as modern insulation, these methods made a noticeable difference in heat retention. Families would renew this insulation seasonally, adding fresh material before winter set in. Door and window management became an art form during winter months. Thick cloths hung over entrances created airlocks that prevented direct cold infiltration when doors were opened. Some homes had double door systems with a small transitional space between, allowing people to close one door before opening the next. A simple but effective way to minimize heat loss during comings and goings. Spatial organization within the home reflected heating priorities. Work areas for winter crafts were positioned to take advantage of the hearth's heat, while sleeping areas were arranged to benefit from rising warm air. Some clever homeowners created elevated sleeping platforms, knowing that warmer air would naturally rise to these higher spaces. The timing of daily activities was aligned with heating efficiency. Baking bread, for instance, was often done in the evening so that the oven's residual heat would warm the home during the coldest night hours. Similarly, labor-intensive indoor tasks that generated body heat through exertion might be scheduled for the coldest parts of the day. Archaeological discoveries occasionally reveal truly innovative heating solutions that have no modern equivalent. In some Scandinavian sites, evidence suggests that smoke was intentionally channeled through wall cavities before exiting the home, effectively creating a primitive form of radiant wall heating. Similar systems have been found in parts of Eastern Europe, where the harsh climate demanded maximum efficiency from limited resources. These passive heating methods weren't just practical, they represented a sophisticated understanding of heat management developed through generations of trial and error. While medieval peasants lacked scientific terminology for concepts like thermal mass or convection currents, they intuitively grasped these principles and applied them in ways that made their difficult lives a bit more comfortable. Their strategies reflect a deep understanding of their environment and showcase the human capacity for adaptation and innovation, even in the harshest circumstances. Though their methods might seem primitive to us now, many of their solutions reflected a practical wisdom we can still appreciate today.